"You want to marry me," Eliza Crew said, "to keep your title." She turned the words over the way one turns over a sum that cannot possibly come right, no matter how many times the figures are added. "Have I understood you, Your Grace? You came down through the orchard, in the heat, to ask a beekeeper's daughter to be a duchess, so that you might remain a duke. I did." The Duke of Hartmore stood with the contract held flat against his thigh, his thumb pressing the folded edge as though it might lift on the warm air and blow away between the apple trees. He did not sit. There was no chair for him but the upturned hive box she used for skimming wax, and a duke could hardly fold himself onto that. "I am aware of how it sounds. I should think you are." A bee circled the rim of her honey pail, and she did not flinch from it. She had been stung so often the venom no longer troubled her. Which was, she sometimes thought, a fair description of a great many things. "It sounds like a man at the very end of his patience." "At the end of my fortnight," he said, "which is rather worse." The afternoon lay thick and golden across the slope, the air heavy with the smell of bruised windfalls and cut grass gone to hay, and somewhere below them the river moved without hurry between its banks. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron. They were brown to the wrist, scored with old scratches, and she was abruptly, foolishly aware of them, of how they must look to a man whose own hands had never held anything heavier than a riding crop and a grievance. "Sit down," she said. "You're frightening the bees." "I doubt that very much." "Then you're frightening me, standing over me like a sentence, about to be passed. Sit on the box. It's wax, not poison." He looked at the hive box. Then, to her genuine astonishment, he set the contract upon the table, drew up the skep box, and sat, a tall man made suddenly ordinary by the smallness of the seat, his fine dark coat straining across shoulders that had clearly done more in their 27 years than carry a title about. The sun caught the side of his face. He was handsome in the grave, closed way of a house with all its shutters drawn, and Eliza distrusted handsome men on principle, having once trusted one to her cost. "My father," he began, and stopped. His jaw worked. He started again, and this time the sentence came out level and stripped, the way a man recites a thing he has said to himself 100 times in the dark. "My father left the estate encumbered. The land is entailed and comes to me whole, that much no man can touch. But the trust that pays its debts, that keeps the roofs whole and the tenants in their cottages and bread on 300 tables, that he left under a condition. I am to be married before my 28th birthday, or the whole of it passes to my cousin, and your birthday is a fortnight from Thursday." Eliza set the honey pail down very carefully on the trestle, because it had begun, absurdly, to shake. 300 tables. Her mother's table was one of them. Her own. "Why me?" she said. "You could have any drawing room in the county weeping with joy to take you. Half of London would send a daughter down on the night coach if you so much as coughed in their direction. Because the drawing rooms of the county want a duke," he said, "and I have nothing to offer a wife but a duke's name over a mountain of his father's debts. The women who want that want the name, and would forgive me the debt for it. I should spend the rest of my life being forgiven." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The ghost of where a smile would go if he ever permitted one. "You do not want a duke at all. You think me a great inconvenience walking through your orchard in the heat. That is the most honest thing anyone has offered me in a year." It was so nearly funny that she laughed before she could stop herself, a short bright sound that startled a thrush out of the hedge. "You want to marry me," she said, "because I don't want to." "I want to marry you," he said, "because you'll tell me the truth, and because you have nothing to gain by lying, and because in a fortnight every soul on this land will be turned out by a man who would tax the bees if he could find a way. I am told you keep the accounts for half the holdings on the river meadow. I am told that when the steward tried to raise the Hartleys' rent, in the bad spring, it was a girl from the orchard who found the error in his figures and made him put it back." He paused. "I did not believe it was a girl. That is the sort of man I have let myself become. I came to see for myself. And here I am." She spread her stinging hands. "A girl. Disappointing, I expect. No, said the Duke of Hartmore, and there was nothing courteous in it, nothing performed. It landed flat and certain as a stone dropped into still water. Not in the least. The thrush had come back to the hedge. The bees went on with their work, indifferent to dukes and deaths and fortnights, and Eliza stood very still in the slanting light and felt the whole shape of her ordinary summer come quietly off its hinges. She did not answer him that day. She told him she would think, which was the sort of thing a woman said when she meant to refuse and had not yet found the kind way to do it, and he seemed to understand this. For he rose from the wax box and bowed to her, in her own orchard, with hayseed on his hem, and walked back up the slope toward the great grey house that sat against the hill like a thing too proud to ask for help, and too old to do without it. She watched him go until the heat haze took him. Then she picked up her pail and went down to tell her mother that the world had tilted, and to discover, in the telling, that she had already half decided. The Crews' cottage stood where the orchard gave way to the kitchen gardens, a low stone house with a roof that wanted thatching, and a doorway worn to a hollow by 4 generations of the same family, coming in tired at dusk. The smell of it met Eliza on the step, wood smoke and stewing onions, and the particular sweetness of the honeycomb hung in muslin over the hearth to drip. And her mother was at the long table shelling the first of the peas, her spectacles pushed up into greying hair that had once been the same warm honey brown as Eliza's own. "You've a look on you, Mrs." Crew said, without raising her eyes from the pot. "It's the look your father had the night he lost the grey mare at cards, and won her back again before morning. What's happened?" The Duke came to the orchard. Did he? A pea pinged into the bowl. After his honey, was he? "You may tell his grace that the August comb's promised to the parson, and he can want. He came to ask me to marry him." The pod stopped halfway open in her mother's brown fingers. For a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the slow tap of the honey dripping into its dish, and a blue bottle blundering against the small, thick pane of the window, and from the yard, the thin whistle of Tom mending the gate hinge, 12 years old and tuneless, and entirely unaware that anything in the world had changed. "Sit down, Eliza," her mother said at last, very quietly, and that frightened her more than shouting would have. Sit down and tell it slow. So she told it slow. The contract, the clause, the fortnight, the 300 tables, the cousin who would tax the bees. She told it sitting across the scrub deal table with the pea bowl between them, and she watched her mother's face go through wariness and disbelief, and arrive at last at a still, careful fear that she recognized, because she had worn it herself 2 summers ago. "He's a duke," her mother said. "I'm aware. And you're a Crew. And we lease our ground from his bailiff and pay it in honey and labour when the coin's short, which it always is." "Girl," she reached across and took Eliza's stung hand in both of hers, and her grip was warm and dry and very strong. "Men like that do not marry girls like you. Not for love and not for spite. There's a trick in it somewhere, and the one who can't find the trick is the one who pays for it." I told him the same. And what did he say? He said he didn't want a wife who loved him. He wanted one who'd tell him the truth. Her mother's mouth twisted. "That's a pretty way to say he wants a clerk he needn't pay." "Yes," Eliza said. "I thought so too. And then I thought," she stopped, because the next part was the part that had been turning in her all the way down the slope, and she was not sure she wanted to say it aloud, where it would become real. "Mother, if he loses the trust, Sefton Vane gets the land. All of it. The river meadow, the orchard, this house. And you know what Vane is. You remember what he did to the Pools when he held their mortgage for that one winter. The kitchen was quiet. They both remembered the Pools. Nobody on the river spoke of the Pools without dropping their voice. I remember, her mother said. Then it isn't only me. Eliza turned her hand over in her mother's, so that they held each other, palm to palm. It's Tom. It's you. It's the Hartleys and the Pools' cottage, standing empty, and every soul between here and the weir. If I marry him, the trust holds, and the land's safe, and Vane can go and tax somebody else's bees. She managed a smile that did not quite reach. It's the largest dowry a beekeeper ever brought a duke. I'd be saving him £300 a year in steward's wages, and giving him 300 tenants who'll bless my name. And all it costs me is your whole life, her mother said. That's all it costs you. The honey dripped. Outside, Tom's whistle wandered into a tune and lost it again. I had my whole life planned out once, Eliza said, lightly, because if she did not say it lightly, she would not be able to say it at all. You'll remember how well that went. I'm not certain I'm using it for anything a duke couldn't put to better purpose. Don't. Her mother's voice cracked clean across the word. Don't you do that. Don't you make a joke of it and slide it past me like a coin under a door. Robert Hale was a fool and a coward, and he left you because he hadn't the spine for a girl who could read his own ledgers better than he could, and the loss was his, and the county knows it. Don't you pay for his cowardice twice over by marrying a man who'll never love you because you've decided love isn't owed to you anymore. She was breathing hard. A pea rolled off the table and bounced across the flags. You are worth marrying for yourself, Eliza Crewe. Not for your figures and not for your honey. For yourself. I'll not have you forget it in some great cold house up the hill. Eliza got up, came round the table, and put her arms about her mother's shoulders, and felt the older woman shaking under the worn print of her gown, and pressed her cheek to the warm parting of her hair that smelt of wood smoke and lavender water gone faint with age. Then I'll go up the hill and not forget it, she said, into her mother's hair. I'm good at remembering things. You always said so. I remember every rent on the river to the farthing. She drew back and looked into her mother's wet eyes and made herself say the true thing, the one underneath the joke. I'm not doing it because I think I'm worth nothing. I'm doing it because I think I might be worth a great deal, 300 tables worth, and I should rather spend myself on that than let it sit in a drawer being precious. She squeezed the trembling hands. Let me be worth something we can count. Just this once. It would be a mercy. Her mother turned her face away to the window, and Eliza let her, and went out into the yard to where Tom was wrestling the gate hinge, and did not tell him anything at all, because there are some pieces of news a brother is better hearing tomorrow. She went up the hill the next morning to give the Duke her answer, and found that the answer had been taken out of her hands in the night. There was a carriage on the gravel sweep before Hartmoor when she came over the rise. A glossy black town coach with 4 bays steaming in the early cool, and a coat of arms upon the door that she did not know, but instantly mistrusted, because it had been picked out fresh in gold leaf, while the great house behind it had moss in its gutters, and a cracked pane in the morning-room window that had been cracked since Candlemas. A man stood by the carriage drawing on his gloves. He was tall and fair, and very finely made, with a face that would have been beautiful in a portrait, and was something colder in the flesh, and he was looking up at the house the way a buyer looks at a horse he means to have at his own price. You'll be the orchard girl, he said, before she had got within 10 yards of him. His voice was light, pleasant, perfectly assured. Hartmoor's little economy. I confess I came to see whether the rumour was true. My cousin's own steward, the man you bested over the Hartley's rent, and who has fed me word of this house for a year, sent a rider after me the moment my cousin came down through your orchard, that my cousin means to mend his fortunes by marrying his honey supplier. He smiled. His teeth were very even. Do tell me it isn't so. It would distress me to think him so very desperate. And you'll be Mr. Vane, Eliza said. Sefton Vane. He bowed, the smallest possible inch. His Grace's heir for another 13 days, after which, by his late father's admirable foresight, I become rather more than his heir. He said it gently, as a man might mention the weather, and that gentleness was the worst thing about him. She felt it go down her spine like cold water down a collar. You seem a sensible creature. Let me be plain with you, as one practical person to another. Whatever my cousin has promised you, he cannot keep. A duke does not marry a beekeeper. Even if he were mad enough to drag you to a church, the world would never receive you, and within a 12-month he would hate you for the laughingstock you'd made of his name. You would be a duchess in nothing but the parish register, and a stranger in every drawing-room in England. He drew the second glove smooth over his knuckles. Go home. Keep your bees. In a fortnight I shall be master here. And I assure you I look after what is mine far better than my cousin ever managed. The right people, at least. And the pools? Eliza said. For the first time, the pleasantness flickered, just at the eyes, a single beat, there and gone, like a fish turning under brown water. I beg your pardon? The pools. You held their mortgage one winter. They had the cottage by the weir for 60 years, and the children's children of them, and you put them out on the lane in the snow over a debt of £19 because the law let you. And then you let the cottage stand empty 4 years sooner than drop the rent a shilling for a family who'd have mended it with their own hands. She heard her own voice coming out steady and quiet, and was distantly amazed by it. I keep the accounts, Mr. Vane, I keep all of them. I know to the farthing what kind of master you are. So you'll forgive me, if your assurances about looking after what is yours don't warm me quite the way you hoped. The silence stretched. A pigeon clattered up off the stable roof. Sefton Vane looked at her with his beautiful cold face, and the smile he produced now was a different thing entirely. Thinner and more honest, and she understood that she had just made an enemy who would remember her, and that she had done it on purpose, and that she could not for her life have done otherwise. How interesting, he said softly. He's found himself a clever one. He turned to mount his carriage, then paused with one polished boot on the step, and looked back at her over his shoulder with that thin, small smile. Clever girls do so badly in this world, Miss Crewe. They see everything coming and can stop none of it. 13 days. He climbed in. The door shut on its fresh gold paint. Do give my cousin my warmest congratulations, if it comes to anything. I shall be watching the parish notices with the keenest attention. The coach pulled away down the avenue, and Eliza stood on the gravel in the morning, cool with her heart going like a struck drum, and found the Duke of Hartmore standing in his own doorway behind her. Very still, having heard, she could see it in his face. The last of it, or near enough. You spoke to my cousin, he said. Your cousin spoke to me. I merely declined to be comforted by him. He came down the steps. In the plain morning light he looked younger than he had in the orchard, and more tired, and the grey house rose behind him with its moss and its cracked pane, and its 300 dependent souls, and Eliza thought, he is exactly as cornered as I am, only his corner is larger and has better windows. I came to give you my answer, she said. I think I have just heard it. A muscle moved in his cheek. You told the man who will be your landlord in a fortnight that you know to the farthing what he is. That is not the act of a woman who means to go quietly home and keep her bees. No, Eliza agreed. I'm told I do things badly. Clever girls so often do. She lifted her chin. I'll marry you, Your Grace. I'll keep your trust whole and your tenants safe and your name out of your cousin's hands. But I'll have my terms, and you'll hear them before the banns are read, because I'll not be married on a clause like a parcel of land changing hands. For a moment he simply looked at her, and something passed behind his eyes that she could not name and did not trust herself to name, being out of practice. Then he inclined his head, gravely, the way he had bowed in the orchard. Name them, said the Duke of Hartmore. I find I would rather hear your terms than any other woman's consent. Behind them the cracked pane caught the climbing sun, and far down the hill the bells of the parish church began, all unknowing, to ring the hour, and Eliza Crewe, who had come up the slope that morning to refuse a duke, stood on his gravel and understood that there was no path back down it now that did not run straight through a wedding. The library at Hartmore smelled of cold ash and old leather, and the particular mustiness of a room kept shut against expense, and the Duke led her into it without a word, as though the gravel and the bells and his cousin's gold-painted coach had agreed between them that the next part of the conversation could not be had in the open. Eliza stepped over the worn sill and stopped. One long wall stood floor to ceiling in books, and a quarter of them had gone soft and pale with damp along their spines. The morning came in through tall windows, one of them cracked clean across, and where the sun struck the carpet the pattern had faded to the ghost of a pattern. A great desk sat in the middle of it all, like a ship run aground. You may sit, the Duke said. There are chairs in here, at least. I'm aware you think that a small jest. She did not sit. She walked instead to the desk, where a drift of papers lay weighted under a chipped inkstand, and she looked at them the way another woman might look at a sleeping child. carefully, and with a great deal going on behind her eyes. These are the trust accounts. They are. They're kept badly. I am told that frequently. He came to stand across the desk from her, the width of the wood between them. By my steward, who keeps them, and who is the man you bested in the matter of the Hartley's rent. I cannot dismiss him. I cannot afford to pay a better one, and I cannot afford the gap while I look. That is the whole of my estate in a sentence, Miss Crewe. I am too poor to mend what is poor. Then we'll begin there. She set her brown, scratched hands flat on the papers and looked up at him. My terms. You said you would hear them. I am listening. First, she held up one finger, and was glad to see it did not shake. My mother and my brother. The Crewe lease on the orchard and the cottage is to be set down in writing, in proper form, for 3 lives, my mother's, mine, and Tom's, at the present rent, and it is not to depend in any way upon this marriage. If you tire of me in a 12-month, as your cousin so kindly promises me you will, my mother does not lose her roof for it. That is not a condition. That is the price of my hand, and it is paid before the banns, or there are no banns. Something tightened at the corner of his jaw. Done. What else? Second, the accounts. She tapped the badly kept papers. I keep them. Not as an amusement, and not as your Duchess being clever at the dinner table for the entertainment of guests. I keep them in fact. Your steward answers to me on every figure, and where I find an error, I correct it, and where I find a cruelty, I undo it, and you do not overrule me in front of the servants or anyone else. If you've a quarrel with a thing I've done, you bring it to me in this room, with the door shut, like a partner, and not a master. She paused. I will not be a wife who is handed pin money and told to choose curtains. I had rather keep bees. For a moment he said nothing. Then, you drive a harder bargain than my late father's man of business, and he once made a viscount weep. Your father's man of business never had to marry the viscount. She heard the edge of something almost like a laugh come into the room and pushed it down. Third, the Poole's cottage. It stands empty by the weir. I want it mended and let again, at a rent a working family can pay, before the harvest is in. I'll find you the family. You'll find the slates. That has nothing to do with the trust. It has everything to do with whether I can look at myself in a glass. She held his eyes. Those are my terms. Your Grace. Will you have them? The Duke of Hartmore looked down at her hands, on his ruined accounts, and then at her face, and whatever moved behind his shuttered eyes she could not read, being, as her mother had said, out of practice. When he spoke at last, his voice had dropped lower, stripped of the carefully level thing he had carried into the room. My name is Gabriel, he said. If we are to be partners and not master and clerk, you had better know it. I do not expect you to use it. I only thought you should have it. She did not use it. She gathered the accounts into a neat stack instead, squaring the edges with 2 firm taps against the desk, because that she knew how to do, and the offered name she did not. The house, she discovered over the next 3 days, was a great hollow thing wearing the clothes of its prosperity, like a man grown thin in his father's coat. She walked it because she could not help it. A girl who kept accounts could no more leave a house unread than she could leave a column unadded, and everywhere she went she found the same quiet arithmetic of decline. Fires laid in only 2 rooms. Silver gone from the sideboards, the felt squares, where the pieces had stood still bright against the tarnish around them. A whole wing under Holland covers, the furniture humped beneath dust sheets like sleeping animals, the shutters bolted to save the cost of light. It was in the long gallery, on the 3rd afternoon, that she met the housekeeper properly. Mrs. Greaves was a spare grey woman, with a chatelaine of keys at her waist that chimed when she walked, and she had been watching Eliza go about the house with the flat, unreadable patience of a servant who has outlasted 4 generations of the family she serves and means to outlast a 5th. You'll be counting the linen next, I expect, Mrs. Greaves said. It was not quite insolence. It was very nearly a test. I've counted it. Eliza did not turn from the window she was examining, where the lead had perished in the cames, and a long crack ran down through a pane of old armorial glass. There are 40 pairs of good sheets, and 112 that have been turned sides to middle twice over, and ought to be cut up for the still room. Somebody's been hiding the bad ones at the bottom of the press, so the top of the pile looks well. I shouldn't wonder if it's the same somebody who's been entering best wax candles in the household book, and burning tallow in the servants' hall. There was a silence. The keys at Mrs. Greaves's waist gave a single small chime as she shifted her weight. His Grace's father, the housekeeper said, in a different voice, would not have known a turned sheet from a sail. Nor wished to. A pause. You've a sharp eye for a beekeeper, Miss Crewe. I've a sharp eye for a house that's being eaten from the inside, while it stands up straight and pretends it isn't. Eliza turned at last and looked at the older woman directly. I'm not here to put anyone out, Mrs. Greaves. I'm here because in 11 days, a man called Sefton Vane means to own these walls and everyone behind them, and I would rather walk through fire than let him. If you've been hiding the bad sheets to keep the master from worrying, I'll not say a word against you. But you'll bring me the true count from now on, and we'll save what can be saved between us, you and I. There's not the time left for pride. Mrs. Greaves regarded her for a long moment. Then something in the grey face eased by a fraction, the way a frost eases at the very edge of a thaw, not melting but no longer growing. There's a deal of pride in this house, miss, she said. It's about the only thing His late Grace left in good supply. She turned to go, keys chiming, and paused at the gallery door with her hand on the frame. The cracked window you're looking at. His Grace put his fist through it the night the lawyer read the will. Cut his hand to the bone and never made a sound. Only stood there bleeding on the floor, reading the clause over and over by candle. I bound it myself. She did not look back. I tell you so you'll know what manner of man you're marrying. He'll not say it himself. He'd sooner bleed on the carpet than ask a soul for so much as a bandage. And she went out, and her keys chimed away down the gallery, and were gone. And Eliza stood alone in the long room, with the armorial glass, and thought about a man who would put his fist through a window in the dark sooner than weep where anyone could see him, and found, to her great inconvenience, that the thought would not leave her. The first banns were read on the Sunday. Eliza sat in the Crewe family pew, which was the third from the back on the cold side of the church, with her mother on one side gripping a prayer book she was not reading, and Tom on the other, in a collar that had been scrubbed nearly to transparency, and she heard her own name spoken aloud in the parson's careful voice, Eliza Mary Crewe, spinster, of this parish, and Gabriel Anthony Hartmore, Duke of Hartmore, and felt the whole congregation turn toward her like a field of barley turning in one wind. Mr. Ferris read it twice over, as the form required, and asked whether any present knew cause or just impediment why these two should not be joined. And into the small silence that followed there came a sound Eliza had not expected. The soft, unhurried scrape of a man rising to his feet at the back of the church. Forgive me, Mr. Ferris. Sefton Vane's light, pleasant voice carried to every corner of the cold stone. He stood in the Hartmore pew itself, beautifully dressed, his fair head bowed in a perfect imitation of regret. I raise no impediment. God forbid. I would not for the world come between my cousin and his happiness. I rise only to say, before all these good people who have known the bride from her cradle, how very glad I am for her. It is no small thing for a girl of Miss Crewe's situation to rise so far so fast. He let his pale eyes travel, mild and smiling, across the rows of weathered faces. I am sure not one soul here begrudges her her good fortune. I am sure none of you wonders what a duke can want with a beekeeper that he could not have had for the asking, and without a ring. I am sure you are all far too charitable to wonder any such thing. A beat. I only wish to wish her joy. Pray continue. He sat, and the poison did its work exactly as he had ground it, for it was a poison that needed no further hand. All down the pews the heads bent together, and the whispering began, soft as wind in the thatch, and every face that had turned toward Eliza in welcome now turned again, with the question Vane had so charitably planted growing visibly behind it, what does a duke want with her, that he'd not have for the asking? Eliza felt her mother's hand close hard over hers. She felt Tom go rigid beside her, 12 years old and not understanding the words, but understanding perfectly the smell of cruelty in a room, and she felt the heat come up her own neck, the old shaming heat, the one she had not felt since Robert Hale walked out of this very church 2 summers gone and left her standing. She did not let it reach her face. She had learned that much, at least at a hard school. She sat with her chin level, and her hands still under her mother's, and she looked once, steadily, the length of the church to where Sefton Vane sat with his head devoutly bowed, and she let him see her see him. "I keep all the accounts, Mr. Vane," she told him without a word. "Yours among them." And then she faced front again, and bowed her head for the blessing, and only she knew that beneath her mother's hand her own fingers had curled into a fist that would have done credit to a duke and a window. He was waiting for her in the churchyard after. Not Vane. Vane had gone, his charity discharged. The Duke. He stood by the light gate in the green shade of the yew, with his hat in his hand, and he had heard it, all of it. She could see that he had heard it in the set of his shoulders, the way a man stands who has been struck and refuses to show where. "You came down from the house," she said, "to the church. For the banns." It surprised her. She had not thought he would. "I will not have it said that I am ashamed to stand up in my own parish and be married." His jaw was tight. "Though it appears my cousin will see to it that something rather worse is said instead." "I am sorry, Miss Crewe. I brought that on you. I did not think he would dare it in a church. Your cousin would dare it at a font with the baby in his arms, if he thought it would serve." She drew her shawl closer. Though the day was warm, it was something to do with her hands. "He's not wrong, you know. That's the trouble with him. Everything he said is true. A duke does not want a beekeeper for any reason the parish would call respectable. He's only made them say aloud the thing they'd have whispered anyway. I'd sooner have it out in daylight." "Would you?" He looked at her, with that grave, shuttered attention. "You stood it better than I did. I wanted to take him by the collar in the house of God and put him through the east window. You sat there and looked at him as though you were adding up his sins for the bill. I was, and there it was again, that almost laugh, surprised out of her by the plainness of it. It's a long bill. I don't doubt it. The corner of his mouth moved, not the ghost of a smile this time, but very nearly the thing itself, brief and dry, and gone again. Send it to me. I find I should like to settle his account in full." She felt the smile reach her own face before she could stop it, and she turned it quickly toward the gravestones, so he should not have the satisfaction of seeing how much it had startled her, that a man with all his shutters drawn had opened one, just for a moment, and let a little dry light out. It was on the Tuesday that she found the thing that changed the shape of everything. She had been at the trust accounts in the library since early, the long deed box open on the desk, and the deed itself unrolled before her under the chipped inkstand. For she had told the Duke she would keep his books, and she meant to know exactly what she was marrying into, to the last farthing and the last clause. The household book had been straightforward, if grim. The rent rolls she could have read in her sleep. But the deed of trust itself, the great vellum instrument that the late Duke had drawn to bind his son, she had left until last, because lawyer's hand made her eyes ache, and because some part of her had not wanted to read the precise wording of the cage she was walking into. She read it now. She read it slowly, her finger moving under the crabbed lines the way it moved under a column of figures, and a coldness began to gather low in her chest that had nothing to do with the damp in the room. The condition was not what she had understood it to be. Provided always, the clause ran, in the dry, pitiless music of the law, that the said marriage be a true and lawful union, and not a colourable or collusive arrangement, entered into for the sole purpose of defeating the gift over hereinafter limited, and in the event that the same be shown, to the satisfaction of the trustees, to be such a colourable arrangement, then the trust hereby created shall be void, as though the marriage had not been solemnized, and the whole shall pass to Sefton Vane as if these presents had never been made. Eliza sat very still. She read it again, and a third time, slowly, to be quite sure her ache-blurred eyes were not deceiving her, and they were not. It was not enough that the Duke be married before his 28th birthday. The marriage had to be true. Not a bargain, not a clause, answered with a clause. Not a beekeeper handed a ring to keep a cousin out of a great cold house. If anyone, if Sefton Vane, who would farther challenge it at a font, could persuade the trustees that the thing was a sham, a marriage on paper only, contracted for the single purpose of defeating his claim, then it all fell to him exactly as though no wedding had ever taken place. The roofs, the river meadow, the orchard, her mother's table, and the pool's empty cottage and 300 souls, and the Duke, Gabriel, had not told her. She sat with the vellum cold under her fingers and felt the whole careful structure of the bargain she had made shift and groan like a floor giving way. "You'll tell me the truth," he had said, "because you have nothing to gain by lying." He had asked her for honesty in the very orchard and named it the most honest thing offered him in a year, and he had let her name her terms and shake hands on a marriage of plain convenience, a partnership of figures and slates and 3 lives written in a lease, knowing all the while that a marriage of plain convenience was the one and only thing that could lose him everything. Knowing that the law would call their honest, loveless, sensible bargain colourable and collusive, and hand the whole of it to Sefton Vane on a plate. He had asked her to save him by being exactly what could ruin him. Behind her the library door opened. She did not turn at once. She heard his step on the worn carpet, unhurried, the step of a man come to see how his clever beekeeper was getting on with his ruinous books, and she heard him stop a little way off, and she knew without looking that he had seen which document lay open under her hand. "You've read it," the Duke of Hartmore said quietly. "I've read it." Eliza laid her flat brown hand over the cold clause, as if to cover it, as if covering it could make it untrue, and she turned in the chair at last and looked up at the grave, shuttered face of the man she was to marry in 9 days. "Your Grace, when were you going to tell me that our bargain is the precise thing your cousin needs to take it all? Or were you not going to tell me at all? Only marry me, and trust that the beekeeper would never trouble to read the deed?" And in the silence that followed, in the cold light through the cracked armorial glass, she watched the last of his shutters come down, and understood, with a lurch, that whatever he was about to say, it was going to be worse than the clause itself. For a moment he said nothing at all. He stood at the end of the great aground desk, with the dust turning gold in the cracked light behind him, and Eliza watched the level thing he carried go out of his face the way warmth goes out of a stone at evening, not all at once, but from the edges in. "I knew," the Duke of Hartmore said. "I have known the wording of that clause since the night I put my hand through the gallery window. I dare say Mrs. Greaves has told you about the window. She tells everyone. It is the only romance the house has had in a decade." His thumb pressed the carved scroll at the back of the empty chair, hard, until the knuckle whitened. "I knew it when I came down through the orchard. I knew it when I let you stand there and name me your terms, the lease for 3 lives, the accounts, the pools, slates, and shake my hand on a marriage of plain convenience, as though plain convenience were the safe thing. It is the one thing that is not safe. A clever bargain is exactly what the law calls a colourable one. I asked you to save me with the precise act that hands it all to my cousin." "Then you are a fool," Eliza said, very low, "or I am, and I have a horror of not knowing which." "You are neither." He drew a breath that did not steady him. "Sit, and I will tell you the rest, and you will hate me cleanly, which is better than hating me by halves." She did not sit. She kept her flat brown hand spread over the cold claws, as if her palm could hold the vellum shut, and the chipped inkstand threw its small crooked shadow across her wrist, and a single bee that had followed the honey smell of her in from the gardens blundered against the cracked armorial pane, and could not understand why the summer would not let it through. "Tell it then. I did not find you by accident." He said it plainly, the way Mrs. Greaves had said he cut his hand to the bone and never made a sound, a fact laid down to be looked at. When the lawyer read the clause, I had a fortnight and no wife, and a county full of women who would take the name and forgive the debt and laugh at me behind their fans for the rest of my life. I sat in this room and I made a list, not of women, of arguments. I asked myself what marriage a man like my cousin could least easily call false, and the answer was not a great match. A great match between a poor duke and a rich man's daughter reeks of the counting house. Any trustee can smell the bargain in it. The answer was a marriage that the whole parish would swear was real, because it was the kind of story the parish loves to believe in. His eyes came up to hers. A duke who marries down. Out of need, the world would say at first. And then, out of something better. A rescue. A girl everyone pitied, lifted up. That is a tale no one calls collusion, Miss Crewe, because every soul in that church on Sunday wants it to be true. The bee found the broken seam of the lead and went out into the heat, and Eliza wished, foolishly, that she could go with it. A girl everyone pitied, she repeated. I made inquiries before I came. He would not look away from her now, though she could see what it cost him. It was the look of a man holding still under a surgeon's hand. I learned that you kept the river accounts. I learned that you had bested my steward over the Hartley's rent. And I learned, because a man buying a story must know the whole of it, that 2 summers ago you were left standing in that same church by a coward named Robert Hale, who could not abide a girl who read his ledgers better than he did, and that the parish had been sorry for you ever since, in the soft, cruel way a parish is sorry. His voice did not rise. That was the unbearable part. I came down through your orchard knowing you had been thrown over once in public. I told you your honesty was the most honest thing offered me in a year, and I meant it, but I had already weighed your shame and found it useful before I ever saw your face. That is what manner of man you are marrying. I thought you had better hear it from me than read it in my cousin's eyes. The heat pressed at the cracked window. Somewhere off in the Holland-shrouded wing a shutter creaked on its hinge, and the honey smell of her own hands rose at her suddenly, sweet and ridiculous, and Eliza stood in the ruined library and felt the floor of the bargain she had made go out from under her entirely. You weighed my shame, she said, and found it useful. Yes, the way I weighed your debt and found it 300 tables worth. She heard her own voice come out terribly even, the account-keeping voice, the voice that had got her through the last church she was shamed in. We are very alike, Your Grace. We both came to the orchard with a column already added. I priced your roofs, and you priced my disgrace, and we shook hands over the figures and called it a partnership. A muscle moved in his cheek. It is not the same. No, she agreed. Mine was honest. I told you to your face what I wanted of you. You let me believe you wanted my truth, when what you wanted was the look of the thing, a beekeeper grateful enough, and pitied enough, that no trustee would ever suspect the man who took her could have a cold reason in the world. She lifted her palm from the claws at last, slowly, and the vellum sprang half shut with a dry whisper like a thing exhaling. You did not want me to tell you the truth. You wanted me never to ask for it. Eliza, you have not the right to that name. She had not known she would say it until it was out, flat and final as a ledger ruled off, and she watched it land on him and saw, with a savage small satisfaction she was not proud of, that it landed hard. She gathered the household book and the rent rolls into her arms, not the trust deed. She left that on the desk, would not carry the cage out into the daylight, and she walked the length of the worn carpet to the door, past the great cold hearth full of last winter's ash, past the wall of damp blistered books, and he did not try to stop her, which was perhaps the only merciful thing he had done since the orchard. At the threshold she turned. He was standing exactly where she had left him, tall and ruined in the failing light, his hand still on the back of the empty chair, as though without it he might not keep his feet. You should have told me in the orchard, she said. I'd have married you anyway. That is the thing you were too proud or too frightened to gamble on. That I'd have done it with my eyes open, for the pools and my mother and the 300, and counted the cost and paid it gladly. You did not trust me with the truth, because you have never once in your life trusted anyone with anything. And now I cannot tell which parts of you are real. And that, Your Grace, is a far more expensive thing than your father's debts. She drew the books tight against her. I'll send word whether there's to be a wedding. Don't come down the hill after me. You frighten the bees. And she went out, and left him with his window and his claws and his beautiful cold cousin's tail to live inside, and she did not look back, because she had learned at a hard school exactly how much it costs to be the one who looks back. The walk down the hill was the longest she had ever made it. The afternoon had gone heavy and white with heat, the sky the color of skimmed milk, and the hayfields lay shorn and shimmering on either side of the lane, with the cut grass curing in long rows that breathed their green-gold sweetness up at her as she passed. Crickets soared in the verges. A heron lifted off the river with a slow creak of wings and folded itself away downstream, and the dust of the lane was warm and soft as ash through the worn soles of her shoes, and Eliza walked through all of it carrying 2 ledgers and a hurt so large she could not yet find the edges of it. She had told herself she was past this. That was the bitter marrow of it. She had stood in that very church 2 summers gone, and felt the whole congregation's pity settle on her shoulders like snow, and she had walked home and resolved, with all the fierce cold sense she owned, that she would never again offer herself up to be valued, and found to be the wrong thing. She would be useful instead. Useful was safe. Figures did not jilt you. Honey did not leave you standing at an altar. She had built herself a life out of being needed for what she could do, precisely so that no one could ever again refuse her for what she was. And a duke had walked through her orchard and seen the whole architecture of it in an afternoon, and priced the foundation stone, and used it. The cottage came up out of the kitchen gardens in its hollow of warm stone, the honey still dripping in its muslin over the dead hearth, and her mother took one look at her face across the threshold, and set down the colander of red currants she was hulling, and said nothing at all, only opened her arms, and Eliza walked into them the way she had not let herself do, since she was a child with a stung hand, and stood in the smell of wood smoke and lavender water, and let her mother hold her up. "He told you something," her mother said into her hair. "What did he tell you?" So Eliza told her, sitting at the scrub deal table with the currants bleeding their thin red across the wood between them, and a wasp investigating the muslin, and the long bars of dusty light leaning in through the small thick panes. She told it without crying, which was worse, her mother said afterward, than if she had wept the roof down. She told her about the clause that required the marriage be true, and about the list of arguments, and about the tale the parish loved to believe, and about Robert Hale's name spoken in that cold, ruined library by a man who had weighed her oldest wound and entered it in his accounts as an asset. Her mother listened to the end. Then she got up, went to the dresser, poured 2 measures of the elderflower cordial she kept for fevers and bad news, and set one down in front of Eliza with a small, hard click of the cup against the wood. "He wanted your shame, Mrs. Crewe said, and not you. He courted the pity of the parish and called it your honesty." She said it slowly, laying each word down flat and terrible, making her daughter hear the whole shape of it. "That is what he has told you. Now drink that, and then I will tell you what I think, and you may throw it back in my face if you like." Eliza drank. The cordial was cool and flowery and tasted of last June. "Tell me." "I think," her mother said, "that a man who meant only to use you would not have ridden down the hill to read the banns in his own parish with hayseed on his coat, when standing away would have served his cold tail just as well. I think a man who meant only to use you would have let you sign that deed in your ignorance, and never breathed the clause to a living soul." She turned the cup in her brown fingers. "He told you the worst of himself, Eliza, on a Tuesday, with 9 days to spare, and everything to lose by your walking out. And you walked out, as he must have known you might. A man protecting a bargain does not hand his hostage the knife. There's something in that account that doesn't add up, and you of all people know what it means when a sum won't come right." She reached across the bleeding currants and took her daughter's stung hand. "It means a figure's been hidden. Find the hidden figure before you decide what kind of man you're refusing." The wasp blundered against the window. Outside, faint and tuneless, Tom was whistling at the gate again, and the ordinary going-on of the world pressed at the small hot room. "I cannot afford to find anything," Eliza said. "There are 9 days. If I marry him, it must be a true marriage, or it all falls to vain, and I do not know how to counterfeit a thing that took Robert Hale a year to break in me, and that I have spent 2 more swearing I'd never offer again." And if I don't marry him—" She stopped. She made herself say it, because not saying it would not make it less so. "If I don't marry him, the Poole's cottage stays empty, and yours fills it, and Tom grows up a tenant of Sefton Vane, who put a family on the lane in the cold over £19. There is no door out of this room that doesn't cost somebody their roof." Her mother held her hand and did not argue, because it was true, and they sat together in the leaning light with the currants and the cordial, while the afternoon burned slowly down toward evening. Two women adding the same impossible column over and over, and getting the same answer they could not pay. It was Mrs. Greaves who brought the hidden figure to her door 2 mornings later, when Eliza had still sent no word up the hill, and the bees were working the lime walk in a low gold roar, and the whole valley lay drugged and droning under the high summer heat. The housekeeper came down on foot, which a Hartmore housekeeper did not do, her keys silent because she had wrapped them in her handkerchief against the chiming, and that small secrecy told Eliza more than her face did, which told nothing. She stood in the cottage doorway with the lime scent and the bee roar behind her, and refused the chair and the cordial both. "I'll not stop," Mrs. Greaves said. "If I'm asked, I came down for the August comb that's promised the parson, and you may give it me to carry back so it's not a lie." Her grey eyes went once round the low room, the dripping muslin, the scrubbed table, the ledgers stacked where Eliza had set them down, and came back. "There was a letter come up to the house yesterday by the London post. His Grace read it in the library, and then he sat with it an hour and rang for nothing, which he does when a thing is bad. I'm not in the habit of reading the master's letters, Miss Crewe. I'm in the habit of dusting the desk they're left on. Mrs. Greaves." It was from the trustees. The keys gave one muffled chime through the handkerchief as her hand tightened. There are 3 of them, by the late Duke's appointment. 2 are honest old fools who take their cue from a coin toss. The 3rd is a Mr. Carow, of Lincoln's Inn, and Mr. Carow had a letter of his own, from your friend Mr. Vane, and the letter Mr. Carr. Carow has now sent to his Grace says that, the question of a true union having been raised by an interested party, the trustees will not release the trust upon the mere fact of the marriage. She drew a slow breath. They mean to come. All 3. To the wedding, and to the breakfast after, and to satisfy themselves, in Mr. Carrow's words, that the thing is a marriage in deed and affection and not in form alone. They will watch you, miss, the pair of you. And on what they decide they've seen, the whole of it turns. The honey dripped into its dish. A long way off a dog barked twice and gave it up to the heat. So it is not enough to be married, Eliza said. We must be seen to love each other, by a lawyer of Lincoln's Inn, who has already had Vane's poison in his ear before he sets out. By a lawyer who'll be looking for the seam in it, Mrs. Greaves said, because he's been told there's a seam. For the first time the spare grey face moved, something dry and bleak coming into it. I've kept that house through a master who'd sooner bleed on the carpet than ask for a bandage, miss. I know exactly how well that family performs affection in front of strangers. We'd do better to teach the bees to waltz. She held out her wrapped hand. Now give me the parson's comb, and walk me to the gate, and decide what you're made of on the way, for there's not above 8 days left to be made of it in. Eliza fetched the comb in its crock, and walked the housekeeper out past Tom, and the mended gate into the blinding lime walk, where the bees went up and down the flowering trees in their thousands, the air so thick with scent and sound it lay on the skin like warm water. At the lane's end Mrs. Greaves took the crock, and tucked it under her arm, and looked back at the great grey house, standing proud and shabby against its hill. He has not eaten since you went, she said to the house, and not to Eliza. I don't tell you to move you. I tell you because you keep accounts, and a true account leaves nothing out. And she went away up the hill with the parson's honey and her silenced keys, a spare grey figure shrinking into the heat haze. And Eliza stood in the roaring gold of the lime walk, and felt the hidden figure her mother had bid her find slide quietly into its place in the column, and the whole sum begin, terribly, to come right in a way she had not let herself imagine. She went up the hill that evening, in the long amber light, when the heat had broken at last into a faint sweet breath of air off the river, and the swifts were screaming high over the chimneys after the rising flies. She did not send word ahead. She walked up through the orchard where it had begun, past the upturned hive box still standing where he had sat on it like a tall man made ordinary, and in through the garden door that Mrs. Greaves, she suspected, had left on the latch on purpose. She found him in the library, of course. He was standing at the cracked window, with his back to the room, and the deed of trust unrolled on the desk behind him, exactly where she had left it, and the dying light came through the armorial glass and laid a long broken lozenge of red and gold across the faded carpet, and across him, so that he stood half in colour and half in shadow, like the house itself. "I told you not to come down the hill after me," she said. "I did not say I would not come up it." He turned. Whatever he had been carrying these 2 days, it was in his face now, without a shutter left to hide it. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been adding the same impossible column she had, and getting the same answer he could not pay. He did not move toward her. He had learned that much. "Mrs. Greaves came to you," he said. Mrs. Greaves came for the parson's honey, and is a very poor liar, which I find I like in a person. Eliza set her hand on the back of the chair she had refused to sit in 2 days before, gripping the carved scroll where his own hand had whitened, taking, deliberately, the place he had stood. "The trustees mean to come. Mr. Caro with Vane's whisper already in his ear, and 2 old fools who'll follow him. They'll watch us across your wedding breakfast and decide whether we love each other, and on it everything turns. You knew that yesterday and sat an hour and rang for nothing. You were not going to tell me that one either, were you?" "No," he said it without defense. "I had used you badly enough. I thought I would let you walk away clean, while there was still a path that did not run through my cousin's hands. I had begun to think the cleanest thing I could do for you was lose." "Lose?" She stared at him. "Lose 300 tables to spare my feelings. You arrogant, ruinous man. You would burn the village down sooner than ask the girl in the orchard to help you carry the water." She came round the chair. The broken lozenge of light slid across her as she crossed it, red over her brown hands, gold over her honey-coloured hair, and she stopped within reach of him for the first time since the gravel and the bells. "Listen to me, because I will say it once, and then we will be partners, or we will be nothing. You weighed my shame and used it, and that was a coward's act, and I have not forgiven it. But my mother is wiser than both of us, and she set me to find the figure you'd hidden, and I have found it. You told me the worst of yourself with 9 days to spare and everything to lose. A man cannot do that for a tale he means to sell to a lawyer." She drew a breath. "You did not weigh my shame because you wanted to use me. You weighed it because you could not bear to want me without a colder reason to hide behind. You are exactly like this house, Gabriel. You would rather stand here proud and shabby with the rain coming in than let one soul see you cannot do it alone." He went very still. The swifts screamed beyond the cracked glass. "And if that were true," he said, "lo, what then? Then we have 8 days to teach 2 people who would each sooner bleed on a carpet than ask for a bandage how to look, to a hostile lawyer, as though they cannot do without each other." She did not let her voice shake, though something underneath it had begun to. "It is the largest counterfeit a beekeeper ever attempted, and the worst of it, the very worst of it, is that I am no longer certain how much of it either of us would be obliged to counterfeit. That frightens me more than your cousin does. I built my whole life so that no one could refuse me for what I am ever again. And you have walked into it and asked me to offer exactly that, in public, to a man looking for the seam. If I do this and Caro sees through it, I am shamed in that church a second time, before the whole parish, and there is no third life left in me to build after it." "Eliza." He said her name as though it had been given back to him, carefully, a thing he was not sure he was permitted to hold. "I will not let it come to that. You cannot promise me that. No one can." But she did not step back from him, and the light went red and gold across them both, and for one long breath the ruined room held them in it like a thing that had not yet been told whether it would be allowed to keep them. Then she stepped back, because she had learned the cost of not stepping back, and squared her shoulders, and was the account keeper again. 8 days. We begin tomorrow, and the first true thing you will do, before we counterfeit a single false one, is eat the supper Mrs. Greaves has been carrying up and down those stairs untouched, because a man who faints into his soup at his own wedding breakfast will convince no lawyer of anything except that he married for the meals. It startled a sound out of him, not the ghost of a smile this time, but a short, rough breath that was very nearly a laugh, surprised out of a man who had clearly not made one in a long while, and she saw how it changed his grave, shuttered face, and turned quickly to the desk, so he should not see how much it had undone her. She was rolling the deed of trust to carry it to the lighter table by the window. She would not leave that wording lying loose another night. When she heard it, wheels on the gravel sweep below, the crunch and jingle of a coach drawing up that had no business drawing up at Hartmoor at dusk, 8 days before a wedding. She went to the cracked window. Gabriel came to her shoulder, and they looked down together through the broken armorial glass at the sweep, where a glossy black town coach stood steaming in the amber light with 4 bays and a coat of arms picked out in fresh gold leaf that she knew. Now, far too well. "Vane," she said, "he's brought his coach to your door at supper time. Even your cousin has better manners than that, unless he means it for a message." "He means everything for a message." Gabriel's voice had gone flat and cold. The carriage door was opening. Vane's fair head emerged, beautiful and unhurried, and he turned to hand someone down after him. A courtesy, a small theatre of welcome played out on the gravel for the benefit of the watching house, for Vane never did anything that was not also a performance. A man stepped down from the coach behind him. Eliza's hand closed hard on the cold lead of the window came. The light was failing, but she would have known that set of the shoulders in the dark. At 100 yards, 2 summers gone, or 20. The easy stance, the well-cut coat a little too fine for the man inside it. The particular careless tilt of a head that had once bent over her father's ledgers and called her clever, as though clever were a fault to be forgiven. Eliza, Gabriel had felt her go rigid. She heard the question come into his voice. "What is it? Who is that with him?" She watched Sefton Vane lay a friendly, proprietary hand on the newcomer's shoulder and turn him to face the house, the way a man turns a witness toward the bench, and she understood the whole of Vane's design then, complete and exquisite and cruel, that he had not come to argue the marriage false in law. He had gone and fetched the one living soul who could stand before Mr. Carow of Lincoln's Inn and swear, with the ring of the wounded and truthful, that Eliza Crewe was a cold and mercenary creature who had once been ready enough to marry without love and would do it again for a duke's roofs, and that there was not affection in it anywhere, only a clever girl and a desperate man and a column added in an orchard. "It's Robert Hale," she said. And the Swifts went on screaming over the chimneys, and the gold leaf burned on the coach door in the last of the light, and down on the gravel, the man who had left her standing in a church looked up at the cracked window, as though he could feel her watching, while at her shoulder the Duke of Hartmoor said her enemy's name over once, very softly, like a man learning at last the exact shape of the thing that meant to take everything from them both. They went down together, because there was no version of the next hour that Eliza would consent to face from behind a window. The stairs were unlit. The great hall lay in a brown dusk that smelled of cold stone and beeswax, and the faint green of cut hay drifting in through the open garden door, and their 2 sets of footsteps came back at them off the bare flags, hers quick, his measured, neither of them speaking. At the foot of the stairs, Gabriel paused with his hand on the newel. "Whatever he says in there," he said, very low, "do not let him see it land. He feeds on the flinch. I have watched him do it since we were boys. I have stood in a church and been pitied by 300 people," Eliza said. "I have had a deal of practice at not flinching. It is the one accomplishment I can offer a duchess's drawing room." She drew her shawl up over her shoulders, though the evening was warm, and lifted her chin. "Open the door." Sefton Vane had not waited to be received. He stood already in the center of the morning room, as though he owned the boards beneath his boots, which, in 9 days, he might, turning his hat in his beautiful hands, and looking about him at the cracked pane and the felt squares where the silver had stood with the mild proprietary interest of a man counting linen he expects to inherit. And by the cold hearth, half in shadow, stood Robert Hale. 2 summers had not changed him so much as Eliza had hoped. He was still fair and easy, and a little too finely dressed for the man inside the coat, and he could not, she saw, make his eyes stay still. They went to her and away, to the floor, to Vane, to the window, with the restlessness of a man who has been brought somewhere he does not wish to be, and paid enough not to refuse. Cousin. Vane bowed to Gabriel, a graceful, insolent inch. Forgive the hour. I would have come in daylight, but I find the evening flatters this poor old house. One sees less of what wants mending. His pale gaze slid to Eliza, and warmed by a careful degree. Miss Crewe. You are looking very well. Marriage becomes you already, and you not even at the altar. I have brought you an old friend. I thought you would wish to renew the acquaintance before your wedding day, rather than be surprised by it on the steps of the church. You have brought me Mr. Hale, Eliza said. I am not surprised by anything you do, Mr. Vane. I have read your accounts. Surprise requires a man to be capable of something one did not expect. Across the room, Robert Hale made a small sound, half a cough, and pressed his knuckles to his mouth. Vane only smiled. She is sharp, is she not, Hale? You told me she was sharp. You told me a great many things. He let his hat rest at his side. Cousin, I shall be brief, since we are all friends here. Mr. Carow of Lincoln's Inn, a most conscientious man, the only one of your father's 3 trustees with any wit at all, will attend your wedding, and your wedding breakfast, and will look very closely indeed at the pair of you. He has been given reason to believe that this union is a thing of convenience merely. A bargain. A clever girl and her ledgers, and a desperate man and his roofs. He spread his hands as if it grieved him. I have only furnished him with a witness. Mr. Hale was betrothed to Miss Crewe, you understand, 2 years since, and is in a position to speak to the lady's character, to her remarkable, her businesslike approach to matrimony. He will tell Mr. Carow what manner of marriage your bride is capable of contracting without one grain of affection in it. And Mr. Carow will draw his own conclusions, and the trust will fall to me, and you, dear Gabriel, will keep your title and nothing whatever to hang it on. The room was very still. A moth had got in and was knocking itself softly against the one lit candle on the chimney-piece, and the small, persistent tap of it was the loudest thing in the silence. And you will be master here, Gabriel said. His voice had gone level in the way Eliza had learned to dread, the way of a man holding a window frame to keep his feet. And the Poole's cottage will stand empty by the weir, and the Hartley's rent will go up in the bad spring, and 300 people will learn what kind of man looks after what is his. They will learn, Vane agreed pleasantly, to pay on time. He turned for the door. I shall leave Mr. Hale to find his own way back. He is staying at the Hartmore Arms, and I have no further use for him tonight. Cousin, Miss Crewe. The inch of a bow again. 8 days. Do sleep, both of you. You look so very tired, and a tired bride convinces no one of anything. And he went out, and his fresh-painted coach took him away down the avenue into the last of the light, and the moth went on beating itself against the flame. Robert Hale stood by the cold hearth and could not look at her. Eliza, he said. Liza, I never meant, when he found me, I did not know it was you he. I had heard the Duke of Hartmore was to marry. But no one said your name. Not until I was halfway down on his coach with his money in my pocket. He turned his hat over and over. I am not. I came because I had not the courage to refuse him, which you will say is exactly like me. And you will be right. You were always right. That was the whole of the trouble between us. His voice cracked. I do not want to do this thing. But he has paid my debts. Liza, he holds my paper now, the way he held the Pools. If I do not stand up and say what he once said, I shall be on the lane myself by Michaelmas. Then, We are all of us in Mr. Vane's pocket together, Eliza said. She found she could not be angry with him. It was like being angry with weather. You had better go back to the inn, Robert. We will neither of us sleep the better for standing here. He went. At the door he stopped and looked back at her once, with the old easy face gone wretched and old, and opened his mouth and found nothing in it, and let himself out into the dusk. The garden door closed. The moth found the open window at last, and was gone into the dark, and the candle steadied, and Eliza stood in the ruined morning room with the man she was to marry, and felt the whole impossible column add itself up to the same unpayable answer it always did. You should let me go, Gabriel said. She had known he would say it. She had felt it gathering in him through the whole of Vane's performance, the old proud ruinous instinct, the fist already drawing back toward the window. There, she said. There it is. I wondered how long you would hold it. Listen to me. He crossed to her and stopped, because he had taught himself not to come too close, and the not coming was its own kind of wound. If Hale stands up and swears you a cold and mercenary creature, Caro will believe him, because Caro has been told to. And then you will have offered yourself up in that church a second time, before the same people, to be weighed and found the wrong thing. And for nothing, Eliza, for nothing, because the trust will fall regardless. I will not have you shamed twice to lose what cannot be saved. Go home tonight. I will send word to Ferris that there is no wedding. Let it fall to my cousin. I would rather lose it all standing than let him do that to you on my account. And there it was, the worst reading, laid flat on the table between them, that he would let 300 tables go, that he would let her mother's roof go and Tom grow up Vane's tenant, sooner than stand beside her and gamble, that his pride, even now, even broken, would choose the grand ruin over the asking, that he had decided, alone, in the dark, as he decided everything, that losing was the kindest thing he had to give her. You arrogant man, Eliza said, and her voice shook for the first time, and she let it. You would burn the village to spare my feelings and call it chivalry. You have not asked me what I want. You have never once asked anyone what they want. You only decide what it will cost them and pay it yourself in advance, so that no one can ever catch you needing them. She took a step toward him, into the space he kept so carefully clear. I do not want to be spared. I have been spared. Robert Hale spared me. 2 summers gone, he spared me the trouble of a husband who could not bear me. And I have been useful and safe and alone ever since. And I am sick to my soul of being spared. She was close enough now to see the candle in his eyes. We are getting married on Thursday. And we are going to make that lawyer believe every word of it. Do you understand me, Gabriel? You do not get to lose nobly. You get to fight. Beside me. And you get to be seen to do it. That is the price of my hand. I named you 3 terms in this house, and now I name you a 4th. You will not face anything alone again. He looked at her for a long moment, half in shadow, and something came into his grave, shuttered face that she had not seen there before. Not the ghost of a smile, not the dry, surprised breath of a laugh, but something rawer and far more frightening. The look of a man setting down a thing he has carried so long, he has forgotten the shape of his own hands without it. I do not know how, he said, to be seen. I have spent my whole life making certain no one ever was permitted to. I know, Eliza said. I built the same house you did, only mine had bees in the garden. We will learn it together, or we will go down together, but we will not do either one alone. She stepped back, because she had learned the cost of not stepping back, and squared her shoulders, and was the account keeper again, because the account keeper was how she kept her feet. Now, mister, Caro has been told there is a seam in us. We will give him one true thing he cannot argue with, and I know precisely what it is, because Mr. Vane was good enough to remind me. He keeps his witnesses in his pocket by holding their paper. The Pool's paper. Hale's paper. He thinks that makes him safe. She found, to her own astonishment, that she was almost smiling. He has forgotten that I keep accounts too. And mine go back 6 years on every holding on the river. Send a boy down to my mother's at first light, and have her bring up the green ledger from the chest under my bed. Tomorrow we do not prepare a wedding, Your Grace. We prepare a reckoning. The wedding day came in hot and bright and breathless, the sky a high hard blue without a cloud in it. The churchyard hues black-green and motionless in air that shimmered above the gravestones. Eliza had walked to her own wedding, because she would not be handed down from a carriage like a parcel of land changing hands. She came up the lane in the pale gold gown her mother had sat up 2 nights to turn and trim, with the cut hay breathing its sweetness off the fields on either side, and the bees of her own hives following her a little way, and then turning back to the lime walk. And she carried, beneath the small posy of orchard flowers, the green ledger bound in a clean cloth. The church was full to the doors. The whole parish had come, drawn by the strangeness of it, the Duke and the beekeeper, and by the whisper Vane had sown on Sunday, which had grown all week in the warm dark of the village like comb in a skep. They turned to watch her come up the aisle, the whole field of weathered faces turning in one wind, and she felt the old shaming heat start up her neck, and she did not let it reach her face. Gabriel waited at the chancel step in his late father's dark coat, and Mr. Ferris stood with his prayer book, and in the front pew on the cold side sat 3 gentlemen in town black, 2 old men, with the mild vacant faces of fools, and between them a spare, dry, watchful man with eyes like a clerk totting a column, who could only be Mr. Carow of Lincoln's Inn. And in the Hartmore pew, beautifully dressed, his fair head devoutly bowed, sat Sefton Vane, with Robert Hale beside him as a sheriff keeps a witness close. Mr. Ferris read the service through to the place where the form has always made its dangerous little pause, and asked the church whether any man knew cause, or just impediment, and Sefton Vane rose to his feet in the deep silence, as smoothly as oil poured from a jug. "I am grieved to interrupt so happy an occasion," he said, and his light, pleasant voice filled the cold stone to its corners. "And I raise no impediment in law. But Mr. Carow is here at my asking, as a trustee of my late uncle's estate, charged to see that this marriage is a true union, and not a hollow bargain struck to defeat his will. And I have brought a gentleman who can speak to the bride's capacity for hollow bargains. Mr. Hale, you were promised to Miss Crewe once. Tell these good people, and Mr. Carow, what manner of marriage that lady was prepared to make." Every head turned to Robert Hale, who rose, white to the lips, his hat crushed in both hands, and Eliza stood at the chancel step in her pale gold gown, and looked at him steadily down the length of the church, the way she had once looked at Vane on the gravel, and let him see her see him. Hale opened his mouth. He looked at Vane, who was watching him with mild and terrible expectation. He looked at the dry, clerkish trustee, leaning a little forward. He looked at Eliza. He began, and his voice failed, and he tried again. "I am to say that she is a cold woman, that she would marry without love, for advantage, and did so seek to marry me." He stopped. The whole church hung on it. Eliza saw his knuckles go white on the brim of his hat, and saw him look, helplessly, at the worn stone floor of the church where he had left her standing 2 summers gone, and saw something break in him that she had waited 2 years without knowing she was waiting for it. "I cannot," he said. "God forgive me, I cannot do it, not in this place." He lifted his head, and his voice came out cracked and loud, and at last, for the first time in his life, brave. "She never sought to marry me coldly. She loved me. She loved me better than I deserved, and I ran from her, because she was cleverer and braver, and worth 10 of me, and I had not the spine to stand beside a woman who cast a longer shadow than my own. I left her at this altar, before all of you. I left her, and you were sorry for her, and you should have been sorry for me, for I am the one who threw away the best thing the river ever offered." He turned to Vane, shaking. "You paid me to call her mercenary. She is the least mercenary soul in this county. The mercenary man is standing in that pew, and you all of you know it, for he put the pools on the lane in the snow over £19. The church erupted in a low roar, and Mr. Ferris rapped his prayer book against the lectern for silence, and Sefton Vane's beautiful face did not so much as flicker. It only went smooth and cold, and still as ice over brown water, the way it had on the gravel when she named the pools. A touching recantation, Vane said, when the noise had died enough for his light voice to cut through it. Bought, no doubt, by my cousin, as I am accused of buying its opposite. Mr. Caro, you see how it is. Every witness here is somebody's creature. There is no truth to be had in a room where a dukedom is in the scale. He spread his hands to the dry trustee. You came to see affection. You have seen instead a play, well rehearsed. Where is your true union? Show me one honest thing in this whole performance that has not been paid for, and I will sit down and trouble you no more. And Mr. Caro of Lincoln's Inn turned his clerk's eyes from Vane to the chancel step, to the bride in pale gold with a cloth-wrapped book beneath her flowers, and said, in a thin, dry voice that carried further than any of them, Miss Crewe, you have not yet spoken. Mr. Vane asks for one honest thing. I confess I should like to hear it from you. The whole church turned to her. Gabriel, at her side, made the smallest movement, as though to step in front of her, to take the blow himself as he took everything, and she felt it, and put out one brown scratched hand, and laid it flat against his chest. Not yet, not this time, and felt his heart going hard and fast under her palm, and held it there a moment in front of the parish, and the trustees, and God. Because Mr. Caro had asked for one honest thing, and that was the most honest thing in the building. You want one honest thing, Mr. Caro, Eliza said, and her voice came out clear and steady, and reached the cold stone corners. I will give you several, and you may keep the change. She unwound the cloth from the green ledger and held it up. I keep the accounts for half the holdings on this river. I have kept them 6 years. This book has in it, in my own hand, the rents and the arrears and the small daily mercies and cruelties of every cottage between here and the weir, including the precise sum for which Mr. Sefton Vane turned the Poole family onto the lane in the winter snow, and the 4 years he then let their cottage stand empty sooner than drop the rent 1 shilling for a family who would have mended it with their hands. She set the book open on the chancel rail. It is all written down. I am happy to read it aloud. That is my first honest thing. I am not a clever girl who hides her figures. I am a woman who keeps them in the open, where any man may check my sums. She turned then, away from Caro, to Gabriel, and she stopped performing for the lawyer, because the next thing was not for the lawyer at all. And here is the other, she said low, but the church was so silent now that it carried. I came up that hill to refuse you. You know I did. I had built my whole life so that no one could ever again value me and find me wanting. And you walked into my orchard and priced the 1 stone I had buried deepest. And I have not forgiven you for it. And I am marrying you anyway. Not for the roofs, Gabriel, though I told myself it was the roofs. I am marrying you because you are the only man I ever met who would sooner lose everything he owns than be seen to need a single soul. And I know that man. I am that man. I have spent 2 years being him. Her voice did, at last, break, and she let it, in front of all of them. You asked me for the truth in the orchard. Here is the whole of it, in deed and affection, and not in form alone. Before this lawyer and this parish and your cousin and the God of this church, I did not mean to love you. It was the worst bargain I ever made, and I would not undo it for the world. That is my honest thing, Mr. Caro. Write it in your column. It will balance. For one suspended moment, no one breathed. The heat pressed at the high windows. A bee, one of hers, that had followed too far, bumbled along a sunshot pane above the altar, looking for the summer. And then Gabriel, Duke of Hartmore, who would sooner bleed on a carpet than ask for a bandage, took her face in both his hands in front of the whole world and let every shutter in him come up at once. I sat in my library and made a list of arguments, he said, not to her, but loud, to the church, to the lawyer, to the cousin in the pew, his voice shaking and not caring that it shook. Because I am a coward of exactly her kind, and I thought if I could only find a marriage no one could call false, I need never risk wanting one that was true. I weighed her oldest wound and called it useful, so that I should not have to call it what it was. He turned to Caro, and his grey eyes were wet and open and unashamed at last. "You asked for a true union, sir. I will give you the truest thing I know. I do not deserve her. I schemed to win her, and nearly lost her by it, and if you take the whole estate and give it to my cousin this hour, I will still count myself the richest man in this county, because she has just said before all of you that she loves me, and I have done nothing in my life to earn it but be honest. Once. Too late, when honesty could only cost me." He looked back at her, and his thumb moved across her cheekbone. "I love you, Eliza Crewe. Not your figures, and not your honey. You, marry me, and keep my accounts, and correct my cruelties, and never. As long as we both go on, let me face a single thing alone." "That," said Mr. Caro of Lincoln's Inn, into the ringing silence, closing his notebook with a small dry snap, "is sufficient." He rose. "Mr. Vane, I have sat on a good many cases of collusion in my years, and I will tell you what they all have in common. Nobody in them ever weeps. I am entirely satisfied. The marriage is true. The trust holds." He inclined his head to the chancel. "I beg your pardon for the intrusion upon your wedding, your grace. Miss Crewe." "Pray continue, Miss Ferris, and you may leave the pool ledger closed. I have seen quite enough of Mr. Vane's accounts for one morning. It was the two old fool trustees who did for Vane in the end, which Eliza thought afterward was the most fitting thing of all. For they had followed Caro's lead all their lives, and when Caro turned cold to Vane, they turned cold too. And one of them, a Sir Marmaduke something with side whiskers like a hedge, said audibly to the other that a man who would put children on a lane in the snow was not a man he cared to dine with, and the whisper of it went round the church faster than Vane's poison ever had, and turned, and came back at him. Sefton Vane stood alone in his beautiful coat in the Hartmore pew, and looked about him at the whole parish turning its weathered faces toward him, with exactly the question he had taught them to ask of Eliza. What kind of man is this, really? And Eliza watched the answer arrive in him, and watched him understand that the clever, cruel performance was over, and that he had lost it not to a duke, but to a beekeeper with a ledger, and that everyone in the room had seen. "You will regret this," he said to Gabriel, but his light voice had gone thin, and it did not carry the way it had, a duchess from a hive. "The county will never receive her." "The county," Eliza said, "received the Pools back into their cottage on Lady Day. Mended and reslated, at a rent they can pay. You may read of it in my green ledger any time you call, though I do not think, Mr. Vane, that you will be calling." She picked up her posy from the chancel rail. "Good morning. Mind the step on your way out. It wants mending, like a great many things in this house, but we mean to see to them now. All of them. In the open, where the sums can be checked." And Sefton Vane went out of the church into the white blaze of the summer noon, alone, and his fresh gilt coach took him away down the avenue and out of the valley, and the parish let out its breath all together like one great creature, and Mr. Ferris cleared his throat, and lifted his prayer book, and married them. They were wed in the heat of the day, with the church doors standing open to the smell of cut hay and the drone of bees in the limes, and when Mr. Ferris pronounced them joined, and no man to put them asunder, the whole parish that had come to watch a scandal cheered instead a wedding, and Mrs. Crewe wept into Tom's scrubbed transparent collar, and Mrs. Greaves, in the servant's pew with her keys for once unwrapped and chiming freely, was seen to take out a handkerchief and apply it briskly to her nose, and deny ever afterward that she had used it for anything but the heat. Robert Hale did not stay for the breakfast. He came to Eliza once in the churchyard, in the green shade of the yew where Gabriel had waited for her after the banns, and stood turning his ruined hat, and said, "He will have my paper called in by Michaelmas now, for what I did in there. I shall lose the lot of it." "No," Eliza said. "You will not." She had thought about this on the walk up the hill, because she was a woman who could no more leave a debt unread than a column unadded. "Bring your paper to me on Monday. I keep the Duke's accounts now, and the Duke can buy a man's debt off a Sefton Vane as easily as a Vane can, and at a better rate of mercy. You were a coward once, Robert, and today you were brave once, in the one place it would cost you most. The river keeps both accounts. We will call it square. She managed, for the first time in 2 years, to look at him without the old shaming heat, and found there was nothing left in the place where it had been, but a kind of quiet. Go and be brave somewhere it's cheaper. You've a knack for it, when you're cornered. So have I. It must be a county failing. He laughed, wet and astonished, and bowed to her, a proper bow, the first honest thing she had ever had from him, and went away down the lane, and she watched him go, and did not look back when he was gone, because she had no further need to. The harvest came in gold that year, and the roofs held through the autumn rains, and the cracked armorial pane in the library was mended at last by a glazier from the county town, though Eliza made him leave the leaded crack in the gallery window where it was. He'll not say it himself, Mrs. Greaves had told her, of a man who would sooner bleed than ask, and Eliza found she wanted one pane in the house left honest about what it had survived. It was the following summer, on a hot, bright afternoon, with the hay curing in long, sweet rows on the slope and the swift screaming high over the chimneys, that the Duke of Hartmore came down through the orchard to find his Duchess. She was at the hives in her old brown apron, for she would not give up the bees, and no one had been fool enough to ask her to, and her hands were scored and sticky to the wrist, and she was happier than she had ever in her life expected to be. Which still, on certain mornings, took her unawares, like a stranger at the door. He did not stand over her this time. He came and sat, without being told, on the upturned hive box where she skimmed the wax, a tall man made ordinary by the smallness of the seat, his fine coat off, and his shirt sleeves rolled, and he watched her work with the grave attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. "The Hartley's lease," he said. "You've set their rent down again." "I've set it right. There's a difference. You'll find it in the Green Ledger, page 40, checked and witnessed, in the open." She set the honey pail down on the trestle and looked at him sidelong. "Are you come to overrule me in my own orchard, Your Grace? Because we made a bargain about that, in a library, with the door shut." "I am come," said Gabriel, and the smile broke over his grave face, full and warm, and entirely without a shutter left in it. The thing itself at last, and no ghost of it, to ask my wife whether the August comb is still promised to the parson, or whether a duke might want, and not be told he can want. It startled the bright short laugh out of her that had once sent a thrush out of the hedge, and a bee circled the rim of the pail, and the whole golden slope breathed hay, and bruised windfalls up at the milk-white sky, and Eliza Hartmore, who had come up that hill once to refuse him, and stayed to steal what he had sworn no one would ever be permitted to take, leaned over and kissed her husband in the heat with her honey-sticky hands, framing his unshuttered face. In the orchard where the whole improbable account of them had first been opened, and where, every figure checked and every cruelty undone, it had at last, against all her arithmetic, come right. If this story warmed something in you, if you have ever decided you were worth more counted than kept, or known a heart that would sooner break than ask, stay a while longer by the fire, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which line you carried away with you, and I will see you next time, when the candles are lit and another tale begins.